I think a lot of people have assumed it's just going to be a quarterback. And in the end, I'm just not convinced just yet that that's going to be the case. Then Houston's on the clock, and what does Houston do? And it becomes interesting if Houston decides to auction off that pick, or whether Houston wants to go with a quarterback of its own, or whether Houston wants to go with one of the top defensive players. All I'm saying is, I don't think it's a lock that Houston is going quarterback at 2. That's all I'm saying.
The Houston Texans have a real interesting decision to make, and to be honest, it's really their own fault for putting themselves in this situation. For much of the season, it looked like the Texans were going to be the worst team in the league, secure the #1 overall pick, and draft their quarterback of the future, which many assumed that it was going to be Bryce Young. But a last-second touchdown against their division rival, the Indianapolis Colts, a 32-31 victory, costed them the #1 overall pick, gave it to the Chicago Bears, and the rest is pretty much history. The Bears would end up trading the pick to a quarterback-needy team in the Carolina Panthers for a massive package, including multiple first-round picks and wide receiver DJ Moore. And for a while, it actually seemed like CJ Stroud was going to be the #1 overall pick and not Bryce Young, and the Texans were going to get the guy that they wanted all along. And the belief that the Panthers will be taking CJ Stroud and Bryce Young will fall into the Texans' lap at #2 is pretty much all but gone now, as it is pretty much confirmed that the Panthers will be taking Bryce Young #1 overall. He canceled all the other pre-draft meetings, and now his odds to be the #1 overall pick is up to -1200, when just a month ago it was plus odds. So it's basically confirmed as much as it can be that Bryce will be going to the Panthers, and now it leaves the Texans in a pretty interesting spot and scenario on what they're going to do with the #2 overall pick. Really, throughout the entire season and the offseason up until this point, until about a week ago, people were slating in a quarterback to the Texans as practically a lock at this point, and the first 2 picks of the draft were going to be the top quarterbacks in this class. But then Adam Schefter came out and said some really interesting comments, and now we're kind of at this crossroads where what do we think the Texans are going to do in the draft? Will the Texans take their second favorite quarterback, whether that's CJ Stroud or maybe Anthony Richardson, or will they take the best defender on the board, whether they believe that's Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, maybe even Tyree Wilson, or will they trade down for the spot, collect more capital to help with the rebuild? All of these scenarios are being discussed, and ultimately it comes down to the Texans becoming the biggest player in the 2023 NFL draft. Usually every single year we know what the first couple of picks are going to be, but this draft we have no clue what the Texans are thinking. The Texans have so many unique ways that they can play this. It really just comes down to what is D'Amico Ryans like, what is Nick Caserio like. But if I were in the Texans organization, I think this decision for me would be pretty simple. I believe they should take the best defender on the board, whoever they think that may be, and really punt the season next year and go for one of the top quarterbacks in what's supposed to be a generational quarterback draft class with the likes of Drake May and Caleb Williams. And if you run it back with Davis Mills or Kyle Allen, whoever else that they want to start, maybe a fresh new rookie quarterback that they get later in the draft, you're still likely going to be one of the worst teams in the league next year. You're likely going to be able to get one of the top quarterbacks in the class. And in my opinion, I think Caleb Williams and May are both better than anybody in this entire draft class as far as the quarterback position goes. So if you're not going to be able to get the guy that you want in Bryce Young, and let me assure you, Bryce Young is definitely who the Texans would want to draft if they had to pick out of any player in this draft. It's been reported many times, and even during the season last year when it looked like the Texans were basically a lock to get the first overall pick, it was pretty clear that the Texans organization admired Bryce Young a lot, and new head coach D'Amico Ryan echoed a lot of those same thoughts in his draft combine interview. He said, "For Bryce, I know it's a lot going on to talk about his size. The guy's done it at the highest level in college, and size hasn't seemed to be a problem. I don't see it as an issue because you watch the tape and you put on the tape and you see the kid playing and you see how smart he is, you see the anticipation, you see the accuracy, you see how this guy is calm in critical moments." So it was really evident that the Texans had really hoped that the Panthers would stick with their gut, take CJ Stroud #1 overall, and then Bryce Young would be on the board for them to pick at #2. But now that that's not an option, why should the Texans settle for who they think is the second best quarterback in this class? It doesn't make any sense to me. The Texans are still in full rebuild mode. They're not going to have a great season next year. Why not just take a cornerstone defensive piece, pair him with D'Amico Ryans, who can develop him into being one of the best defensive linemen in the entire NFL? Why not just push all your chips into the middle of the table? And of course, you still have so much capital from trading away Deshaun Watson just this past offseason. Now, let's say if a team like the Cardinals ends up with the #1 overall pick who already has a quarterback in Kyler Murray, you can do what the Bears and the Panthers did this past year, trade up a few spots to secure the #1 overall pick, and then there, you get Caleb Williams, you get a franchise quarterback, and you get a quarterback who is higher rated than anybody in this class, has less risk as Bryce Young, whose size is going to be an issue in the NFL, and then you have a stud on your defense and then a franchise quarterback on offense. That would be an absolute galaxy brain play by the Texans, but I think it's going to be very interesting if they decide to do that. Another interesting scenario, if they do decide that they like one of these quarterbacks enough that they could potentially trade up with their second first-round pick and then select one of the top quarterbacks that falls, whether that may be Will Levis or even CJ Stroud, who seems to be slipping down some boards a little bit. Maybe that's what the Texans decide to do, but I think the best play for them overall is to just look towards next year, not settle for one of these quarterbacks, and then see what happens Texans in 2024. And it may be the right play for the Texans because when you look at the roster, they still have a lot of flaws all across the board. They're going to need a couple of more off seasons to overhaul the talent on their team. They're not ready to compete in the NFL, especially the very competitive AFC. So this could end up being the better play for the Texans long term anyway if they decide to not take a quarterback this year, draft some more weapons, draft some more players on their defense to improve that. So when they do ultimately get the quarterback that they really want in next year's draft, or whether that's down the road in free agency, let's say, for example, they'll have all the pieces on the roster to compete. They'll get their young quarterback into a good situation. And I've already mentioned in a past video that the Texans situation for a rookie quarterback right now isn't honestly that bad. Really, in my opinion, that all comes from their offensive line, which is actually one of the best in the league. You have a fantastic duo of tackles in Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard. They drafted Kenyon Green in the first round last year, who had an up and down season, but I still think he has potential to be a really nice player at left guard. Shaq Mason, they traded for him from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's one of the best right guards in football. And Scott Quessenberry at the center position, he's solid. He'll get the job done for you. So that's why I really like Bryce Young going to the Texans, because I'm not a believer in Bryce Young's size and him being able to hold up at the next level. You put him behind what I see as a top 3 offensive line in the league from the beginning, and hey, maybe that increases his chances of staying healthy and being a franchise quarterback for 10 plus years. Now, of course, that we know that that is not an option, I think the Texans take the best defender on the board, pair him with Derek Stingley to be the cornerstones of their defense. And really, in my heart of hearts, I think the Texans are going to skip out on drafting a quarterback in this year's draft, bank on themselves being one of the worst teams in the league next year, and take their franchise quarterback then. And just like every move in the NFL, this has a chance to go down terribly, but it also has a chance to be one of the best moves that we've seen from an organization in recent memory. And if you're a franchise like the Houston Texans, who have not had a ton of success historically, and then once you finally find your real franchise quarterback, probably the best quarterback in franchise history in Deshaun Watson, and then it went south the way that it did, I think you should be an organization that is willing to take risk and willing to finally find that success. And I know this is not a popular opinion, but I can just not justify settling for a player that I'm not in love with solely because I need one. This Texans rebuild still has plenty of time. They just hired a new head coach. They still have a ton of capital left over from the Deshaun Watson trade. I think they can be patient with this. I think this is the correct play. This isn't a great quarterback class. All the top guys have their own really big red flags. I get the concerns. I really do. But if I'm the Texans, I'm taking a big risk. I'm taking the big swing on this. And if all goes to plan, we will look back on this as one of the greatest moves any organization has ever made. And it truly will fast track the Texans into being one of the best young and up and coming teams in the entire NFL. So now we just wait and see what they do next Thursday, and see if they do go this route, and see if they are planning for the future, or if they are going to settle for one of these quarterbacks, cross their fingers that they work out, and probably end up making a mistake. But if you disagree with that, let me know what you think the Texans should do in the draft. Should they take the second quarterback off the board, whether that's CJ Stroud or maybe Anthony Richardson, or if you think they should trade up from the number 12 overall pick if Will Levis continues to fall down the board. But as always, if you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, drop a like on the video if you did enjoy it. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching the video, and I will catch you guys in my next one.